Hello and welcome along to the Matchbook NFL podcast, Week 8. Hard to believe we're almost halfway through the NFL regular season. I'm your host, Daniel Hussey, joined as always by Sam Farley, Judah Fortgang, and Drew Dinsick. And Drew, look, I want you to revel in this next couple of minutes here. You are the MVP from last week. If you check out Matchbook Insights, you'd have gone 6-1 on your bets, not including the Chiefs lean as well. So you could argue that's a 7-1. But more importantly, the best long shots and best bet came in. But we'll start with the best long shots in the Patriots because they called you a madman, not just on the podcast, not just the three of us here, myself, Sam, and Judah, but also a number of YouTube commenters, and some of them have promised an apology in the next hour or so.
Yeah, so there's no victory dance. You just said it. We're halfway through the season. We got a lot of weeks left. I could give it all back this season. You got to absolutely kind of look forward and try to continue, same processes you go through every week. The key takeaways from that Bills-Patriots game, the fact that the Patriots got to play from ahead was not part of my handicap, but I felt like that was enormously important. If they don't get, the opening drive score and then the quick turnover from Josh Allen and then turning into a 10-point lead, do they win that game? Probably not. So I think, there is still some external factors with all this stuff, and most of my angles last week were literally just, hey, the market has overreacted to the 6 games we've got so far, and if you have any weight on your preseason priors, these should be obvious looks. The fact that they came through is just, you're taking the best of the number, and you just hope that that the ball bounces in your direction. I think the key takeaway from the Bills game, besides the fact that it was they had a very real chance to win that one. Their defense let them down. The market is still rating this Bills defense like they're a top 10 unit for some unbeknownst reason. They're missing their most important players at every level. I don't know how many more weeks in a row we got to say this, but they clearly have pass rush still. But the absence of Daquan Jones is being felt on the front four. The absence of Matt Milano cannot be understated. Maybe he's not a household name, but he's maybe the most important player on that whole defense. And then, of course, Trey White missing the secondary is hugely important as well. So I think they bounce back this week on Thursday against the Bucs, because the Bucs are so inept in sort of the scripted portion of the game. So the Bills probably can take a lead here and play from ahead. And if you also didn't know, the Bills they're a tremendous front running offense. They don't take their foot off the gas. They don't let teams back into games. So kind of excited for Thursday Night Football. If I see the Bills take an early lead, happily kind of continue to back them in that spot. Other than that, I don't think there's really a lot of kind of current market numbers that are just broadly off. We need to talk about the Ravens at some point. Because they're still being ranked kind of in the 7-ish range. Their offense is in the 10-ish range right now by market. That's probably too low. This team is healthy now, and I think the fact that they were so dominant in the trenches is signal. The 2019 Ravens that were just regular season juggernauts were fueled by incredible pass protection and run blocking. And that's what you saw against Detroit. And Detroit does not have the front seven that you can easily push around. So I think there's something there. And, Ravens overcame some early season cluster injuries, the offensive line. I think, there is a potential that the Ravens are going to be in the next 3 weeks, maybe, that they're going to be a top 2 or 3 team power rating wise. I'm not sure I understand why the market is still making the Chargers a top 6 offense. There's pretty clearly some issues going on with the absence of their center, with the absence of Mike Williams, with the scheme that they want to be running. I'm not criticizing Herbert because I still think he does have the tools to be a top 5 guy, but there's clearly other issues going on with that offense that you can't necessarily put them in that rarefied air. And those are kind of the only 3 notes as I look at sort of the top of the market here. In the NFL rankings and stuff that I see as either it just needs a little bit of an adjustment or, doesn't quite square with my numbers.
Yeah, Chargers didn't score in the second half, which is truly shocking, and truly shocking how the over, if you played 48.5 late on, for example, didn't get there. I think we finished at 48. So
crazy.
Judah, over to you. And something Drew touched on is constantly updating your rankings of where teams are at. And I guess it's important maybe in a small sample size of one game or one weekend not to move away from models, for example, but also constantly updating them. So just give listeners a little bit of an insight into how you approach, say, if you come off a losing weekend, how you approach the next 3 or 4 days ahead of the following
Yeah,
weekend.
I'll say 2 things here. Number one, I actually kind of disagree with Drew here on the Ravens. I think it's very important on especially like huge blowout games not to overreact to the outcome of the game, because that kind of spirals and compounds on each other. Like the fact that it was 17-0 to start kind of like illustrates the flow of the game. And I don't think that's kind of signal, because like they're not going to go up 17-0 all the time. I think that it's like particular to the Lens, and the fact that they ended up winning by 30 plus is more a function of a huge lead early than it is kind of the differentiation between these two teams. Obviously, you have to upgrade the Ravens. I was dead wrong on the Ravens. I was wrong about the Lions, but I wouldn't go so far as to say like based on what there should never be 1 week, which kind of like has you going from like 10-3, let's say in the market jumping. Like there has to be consistency and also like matters that are fundamental and not kind of like result based. And obviously I'm not saying that Drew is just making this based on a results case, but that's kind of my approach of just saying like it's gradual. You kind of want to see the pieces, the fundamentals more so than the results. I'll also just, as a general note, I think like for as long as I can remember, there's always been some team or teams that kind of come out of nowhere to have success in the NFL. Like last year, main examples would be like the Seahawks. And if you want to use like betting ratings, the Jaguars, like these teams were like way like bottom feeders, to bottom 8 win totals who like cruised into the playoffs. Like we don't have that at all this year. If you look at the like power ratings of like the top 15 teams, it's like, yeah, that's like kind of exactly what everyone expected in the preseason, which I think kind of adds a new dynamic. And I also think the top heavy teams aren't as good. We've talked about this a bunch. Aren't as good as previous years' top heavy teams, which just leads to like a lot of parity. And there's just going to be a ton of flip flopping of like, we're going to be debating like, is this team a top 10 team? Is this team a top 5 team? Is this team a top 12 team? And it's going to constantly be changing. And I think it's maybe worthwhile to kind of take a step back and say like, where are they at long term? This is going to fluctuate week to week between the, ranges of 3 to 12. And we shouldn't kind of get stuck in that conversation week to week.
Yeah, Sam, and I guess it's constantly trying to update week on week those ratings, as Judah touched on, but not getting carried away in the 1 week sample. It's when do you get carried away? Like, for example, the Patriots win the next 3 or 4 weeks, and all of a sudden they're a really good football team. So it's just finding that balance, I guess, in that.
Yeah, it's so tough. And I think we're all kind of guilty at times of you see a shiny new toy, a team suddenly looks brilliant one Sunday and you overreact. And I think Judah kind of said it about right. I think you kind of need to just pause a bit, take a breath, and try to not let one game particularly kind of sway your rankings on a team or an offense, defense, whatever it is, and just kind of allow a couple of performances to kind of rush over you before you actually kind of make a firm call about moving them drastically up rankings.
Yeah. No, there's good stuff from the guys. Drew, Judah, Sam, we love the disagreements. And for those that had the under, that I set the line at 23.5, as I do every podcast on Drew and Judah disagreeing. The under has flown in at 4 minutes 22
And
seconds.
I guess just to correct the record, my opinion of the Ravens is not results based as much as it really was 2 plays. The one was the first Lamar Jackson touchdown run, where Ronnie Stanley came off the edge and just put a guy into another zip code. And it was like, man, if Ronnie Stanley is playing like that, that's the guy I remember from 2019, not the guy that's been like on and off the injury report for the last 3 years. And then the second play was the Lamar Jackson touchdown pass that came next, which was I clocked it almost 10 seconds in the pocket. And, he did a little bit of maneuvering, a little bit of scrambling, a little running around. And then he eventually finds, Nelson Aguilar in the end zone. And it's like, this is, if it was against a pushover, a team that hadn't been winning much in the trenches, then I would have had a different opinion. But basically just it's a signal, I think, of health. And, and sometimes when you win a game of that magnitude, you don't have to have your guys taking extra hits in the second half. That could carry over. So, it's more of just like a watch this space type of thing with the Ravens. And obviously the fact that they get the Cardinals this week doesn't hurt having an opinion like this.
Yeah, Lamar Jackson, great to see him coming back to somewhere close to his best. And when he first burst on the scene, he transcended in the NFL, watching it essentially running back a quarterback at times when he first burst on. And it's great to see him getting back into that sort of form. So look, we'll get into it. Before we start, if you are watching on the YouTube stream, do hit that like button and be much appreciated. Any comments or questions for the guys, we'll try and get to as many for the end of the show, but also post-show as well, and bringing that forward into next week. And if you are listening on your podcast feed, much appreciated. Later in the week, and we would appreciate a 5-star review on your podcast platform. But let's get straight into it. We will start with Rams at Cowboys. Incidentally, it'll be Jags at Steelers, Texans at Panthers, and then Bengals at Niners. But the Rams on the money line, currently 3.5. Cowboys favorite at 1.36. The point spread on the Matchbook Betting Exchange as of Wednesday afternoon, the Rams are plus 6.5 at 198, and the total is 45. Sam, over to you on this one to start with, because you are leading and you're going to have a small bet on the Rams on the money line. And I guess with the Rams, like they went from such a good performance 2 weeks ago. I thought last week against the Steelers, they were disappointing. They obviously had that poor call towards the end, but it was by and large a disappointing performance from them.
Yeah, I think it was pretty disappointing. And I think we kind of spoke about that before, that this is a team that kind of each week they could give you a little bit of something different, but ultimately they do have a good offense, which I think is the reason why here I would put admittedly a very small stake on the Rams money line. And this is kind of based on two reasons. Firstly, I think the Rams offense is pretty good. I think it's ranked around middle of the park in offensive DVOA, but ultimately it's also, I kind of question where the Cowboys points are coming from. Had a look through the season. They've had 5 rushing touchdowns, 6 passing touchdowns, and 4 from defense and special teams. And I don't think that's more than 1 per 2 games. I don't think that sort of thing is sustainable no matter how good the defense is. And I do think that the Rams, sometimes they do turn the ball over a bit, but ultimately Matt Stafford, when he kind of really wants to, I think is fairly good at retaining possession and kind of not giving up stupid turnovers, especially if they're in a sort of relatively competitive place in the game and not kind of chasing hard. So for me, I just don't overly trust the Cowboys to put up huge points. I mean, we've seen them put up big points on a couple of occasions this season, but I mean, was it 40 points on the Giants, high 30s on the Patriots, who were both kind of really struggling at the time, and they haven't looked great in other games, and I just think this is going to be a bit of a tough one. So I think, I just think the value is probably on the Rams money line. I'm not hugely brave about it, but I'm just going to kind of have that there, a little small wager to kind of keep me interested in the game. And I think this is one I think we might learn quite a bit about both sides after the game on Sunday, but beforehand, I'd rather just kind of have a small stake on this one.
Okay, Rams money line, as we touched on, 3.5 currently on Matchbook Betting Exchange. Be one of the be towards the top on the odds checker price grid there for sure. Drew, Sam touched on a little bit there with the Cowboys' inconsistency. How do you feed that inconsistency into getting your numbers correct and where they are and where potential value lies in some of these markets?
Yeah, I mean, I think the inconsistency with the Cowboys offense really just keeps me off of laying points like this in a game where you have a live opponent. I kind of came into this handicap expecting that my numbers were going to say bet the Rams, and I'm going to shock the world here and snap I think 7-week long streak of betting on a Rams game. I don't have a bet in this one. I wanted to take the points with the Rams, ultimately passed because it fails sort of the basic matchup rubric with the Rams games, which is, can the Cowboys generate pressure without bringing the blitz? And the answer is obviously yes. And if you can do that against Matt Stafford, then you can generally have success. That said, the case for the Rams is pretty straightforward. They have the skill position group to absolutely hurt this Cowboys backfield. In the absence of Diggs, in the absence of kind of some of those younger players continuing their progression from last season, the Cowboys have been beat by fast skill position players in the secondary. The 49ers game is sort of the obvious standout, but they got beat by the Cardinals speed downfield. And I think, the Cardinals and, just in general, the Cardinals, Niners and Rams all have sort of similar characteristics in terms of who they have skill position group wise. So I could see the Rams scoring here. Ultimately, I think the Cowboys, is probably you circle that offense and how they match up with the Rams defense, and that's really where this breaks one way or the other. Their team total is currently sitting at 26.5, which I make a little bit low. And I guess I should just say, from a market rating standpoint, I'm higher than market on Rams, but I'm also higher than market on Dallas, which I think is probably why I'm not inclined to take points here. And I think that you look at the matchup of the Cowboys offense against this Rams defense, and I don't know exactly what the Rams are going to do to get off the field here. The Rams have given up points now to a couple of offenses that were sputtering, a couple of offenses that really just were, Steelers most notably in the second half of last week. Like they just could not find any kind of form whatsoever. And, there are clear talent gaps in this Rams defense that are now, with enough film, I think people kind of know where you want to attack them. The Cowboys, it's been uninspiring so far to start the season, but with a relatively healthy offensive line heading into this week, and kind of another week to kind of separate Tony Pollard from the injury he's suffered at the end of last year. It's possible that he gets going in this one. If I were going to have a bet in this game, I would really only look at Cowboys team total over, because I think their offense has some pretty clear matchup advantages against the Rams defense. And then the cover or the overall total will come down to, how much pressure the Dallas front four can get against a Rams offensive line that's found themselves overmatched now 3 weeks in a row.
Okay, so no official bet from Drew, but looking at the Cowboys team total, so keep an eye on the Matchbook Betting Exchange closer to kickoff for all sort of markets. Judah, over to you, and keeping aside all the talk of Cowboys inconsistency, you feel the markets overall found a right handicap here at 6.5.
Yeah, I actually think Drew and I basically have effectively the same handicap. I want to be attacked. I think the Rams are a better offense than the Cowboys, actually. I'm probably maybe a little bit lower on the Cowboys. But I think we want to be attacking Matthew Stafford. This is based on his traits, his lack of scrambling in spots where kind of his situation calls for it. I mean, good wide receivers, which he definitely has. And then kind of who the secondary he's going up against, and especially the pass rush that he's going up against. The question for me is, can Matthew Stafford kind of mitigate the effects of a Cowboys pass rush? I don't think so. If he does, I think the Rams will have success, and I think the Rams will probably win the game, which maybe makes it a appealing long shot play. But I think it's exactly as Drew mentioned. It goes against everything we know about betting against Matthew Stafford. And we've even seen it a lot this year. They struggled against the Bengals when the Bengals absolutely mauled them. Same thing with the 49ers. And the Cowboys have a terrific pass rush. They can get there quick. They lead the NFL in quick pressure rate. And that's like Matthew Stafford's Achilles heel. With that said, why am I not on the Cowboys? I think the Rams are a better offense. I would be less inclined to say that the Cowboys can kind of take advantage of the Rams, just because right now Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup cannot separate. They have really no secondary options outside of CeeDee Lamb. If they go to him, great. He could have a 10-catch, 150-yard game. But I still have questions about the Cowboys offense. All of which is to say, I think it's a really interesting handicap. If the Rams can kind of scheme open their guys quickly, and like maybe Cooper Kupp has, he's going up against Jordan Lewis, who's been a disaster in the slot this year. That's a huge matchup advantage. Maybe they just go to him quick and operate that game. But it's too much guesswork for me. Maybe some live spots to attack, but I will ultimately be off this game.
Okay, don't have to have a bet in every game. This is no official bet, bar Sam's having a small money line play on the Rams, which could potentially work out. 3.5 currently the market. And incidentally, for those of us in the UK and Ireland, obviously the clocks are going back, or are they going forward? They're going forward. So Sunday 5 o'clock is the slot this week. So it's a more appealing time for Red Zone UK and Ireland listeners. So it's always this confusing couple of weeks between the clocks going different directions. In America and the UK, they shouldn't be moving at all. But anyway, we will move to the Jags at the Steelers. Take a look at the betting that we currently have on the Matchbook Betting Exchange. You can back the Jacksonville Jaguars at 1.7. The Steelers are 2.32. The point spread sees Steelers get a 2.5 head start, and that is over even money. The total is 42. So yeah, Judah, bring it back here. The Steelers, I thought, were superb against the Rams and really stood up. And it's just a team that keeps answering questions when you feel like, okay, they're going to get found out this week. They keep answering. Yet you are fancying the Jags to cover, not just cover the spread here, but you're taking some alternative handicaps too.
Yeah, I think all of the reasons you just mentioned are kind of exactly why I want to fade the Steelers. I mean, like, there's some voodoo that like Brett Maher is going to, miss 7 points worth of field goals and extra points. Also at kind of the spots where it changes the game state, where it goes from like a 1-possession game into a 2-possession game. TJ Watt came up with an enormous interception that I think kind of changed the landscape of this game. All of which is to say, like, we finally saw the Steelers have 2 good offensive drives. Bravo to them. It seems like it's their first 2 good drives all season. Yeah. At the end of the day, this is my worst offense by a wide margin. The Jaguars coming off the mini bye. Trevor Lawrence seems to be healthy. The Steelers play a ton of man coverage. Trevor Lawrence has been probably the best quarterback in the NFL against man coverage. Maybe Patrick Mahomes and Tua Tagovailoa have an argument against that. But either way, he's right up there with them over the past year and a half. That is a huge matchup advantage in my book. They get rid of the ball quickly. That will mitigate the effects of the Steelers pass rush. I just see this as an entirely different class of teams. And the Steelers keep getting upgrades when their fundamentals suggest they are a bottom 8 team. And I will stick with that. If, Mike Tomlin keeps kind of grinding out these 9-8, 10-7 seasons, then I guess I will be the loser here, but I will continue to fade the Steelers. I think the matchup sets up perfectly well for the Jaguars, and the fundamentals I have. The Jaguars is a far, far better team. We haven't even seen the Jaguars hit their ceiling yet. I can very much see that happening in this game.
Yeah, Sam, I can't get this analogy in my head a couple of weeks ago. It might have been made previously, but peak Stoke City to peak Tony Pulis in the Premier League, it just feels Mike Tomlin and the Steelers, particularly this season. That's what I'm getting at. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that analogy.
Yeah, I just think this is. Well, I shouldn't use things like free money, but I look at this line as just being wildly wrong. To be honest with you, I mean, I just don't see any world in which the Jaguars aren't the far better team in nearly every single aspect on the field. They come into this obviously having effectively a bit of a mini bye, 10 days rest because of playing on Thursday night football. So, I mean, we were a bit worried going into last week about Trevor Lawrence's health, but he looked fine. Another 10 days, more than happy to kind of keep expecting good performances from him. And then I've seen just some of the stats I've seen going around this week in the build up to this game that people are taking with any amount of sort of validity is just ridiculous. So I've seen the Steelers are 4-0 in games where Pickett has more than 75 yards. That's not that means nothing. That means absolutely nothing. Do not use that. I'm sure the Jags not particularly good against the pass, but that Kenny Pickett is not going to tear this team apart. He simply isn't. He doesn't have the capabilities. So the Steelers not particularly great against the run, not particularly great against the pass. Trevor Lawrence is very, very good. I can't get my head around this. Like, I'm just Jags minus 2.5 all day long, every single day.
Yeah, Drew, like I'm surprised that they are your Steelers. They are your Steelers, particularly after last week. Pickett to Pickens is my favorite commentary line of the whole season. I just love it. It just gets me every time I'm watching on Red Zone. But I suggest you're not as strong on the Jags here. Jags are a pass for you, I know. But what do you say? Like, it's a tough place to go, Pittsburgh. Mike Tomlin, whatever he's doing, it works. And I know Judah suggested a lot of luck involved, and of course there is. But is it sustainable for the Steelers, and can they potentially win this game or put up a fight against the Jags?
Yeah, I guess for clarity purposes, my book benefits more by the Jags winning than Steelers for futures purposes. I would like to see the Jags win the South. I have a pretty decent stake on that. I have huge upside stake on them from preseason on Super Bowl and AFC. That will absolutely require a top 2 seed, if not a 1 seed. Really requires a 1 seed. And I don't think the door is closed on that yet for the Jags, because as Judah mentioned, we have not seen the best of the Jags yet, particularly their offense. Their offense is sort of in this slow burn still, where you haven't really actually seen them completely put together a 60-minute performance. That's fine. Save it for later in the season. I don't mind. Get these ugly wins. That's fine. But I will kind of comment on the ugly win part of this, which is a little spooky and kind of keeping me from getting too involved here in the Jaguars. They are giving their opponents a lot of unnecessary opportunities late in games. The Bills game, they dominated. And yet the Bills still had the ball with a chance to win and tie late in that game. It didn't really comport with how clearly they were beating the Bills, but it was still a relatively, close call. Against the Saints last week, they probably should have lost that game. And it's all because they tend to play a very, very let you back into the game style of defense. They let the Colts back into the game, not back into the game, but they let the Colts score just unbelievable amount of garbage time points against that prevent defense in the game that they got back from London. And so I think the general game state here looks pretty straightforward to me. The Steelers are miserable in the scripted portion of the offense. The Steelers are wasting lots of downs running into stacked boxes and doing these completely minus EV, swing passes to the running backs and stuff. And I would expect that they put themselves at a deficit in this game, and that then the Jaguars let them back in somehow. And I hope the Jaguars hold on for a win here, because again, that benefits me more than Steelers winning. I think if the Steelers do win this game, I'm going to be kind of frustrated, only because that'll be sort of the top of the Mike Tomlin Coach of the Year hype. I could entirely see a Steelers team with 5 wins finish the season with like 6, because this is not a good team in any way you can possibly draw it up. So good on the Steelers front 4 for continuing to make ridiculous plays. I think ultimately they have a small advantage against an offensive line that is doing better, but still is kind of the key Achilles heel of the Jaguars offense. I think the Jaguars can absolutely play from ahead here, but if we are at halftime and the Jaguars have, say, like a 17-7 type of lead or a 17-3 type of lead, I think that's a pretty clear sign to back the over, because I don't really know what it is about the way the Jaguars play defense, but their coverage is good. They can't really generate much of a pass rush, which I think leaves the door wide open for teams to come in the back.
Okay, so caution from Drew there. Jags are past, but ultimately staying away from this scary handicap. Sam's going for -2.5, and Judah alternative handicap Jags -5.5. And we'll go to the third game here and go to Drew first. We'll take a look at the betting, and we currently have a Matchbook betting exchange. Texans at the Panthers, teams we haven't really had a chance to speak about in the main slot so far in the first 7 weeks. Texans 164 favorites here. The point spread sees the Panthers getting a 3-point head start, and that's in around the same prices for both. And the total for this is 43.5. So, Drew, take it away on the rookie quarterbacks here in this insane matchup we have coming up here.
Yeah, I can't imagine anyone in the Panthers organization is enjoying this week of preparation for the Texans, because the entire world is all talking about, did you make the wrong decision at the quarterback? The wrong decision at quarterback, drafting Bryce Young first over CJ Stroud. I would personally say that 6 weeks. I would say 6 weeks of data is far too soon to make any declaratives in that regard. And I would also kind of point out that the situation for CJ Stroud is substantially better, just in that he has 2 pass catchers with a pulse, and Bryce Young has 1, and Adam Thielen, who may be better than he's being given credit for, but not by much. And I think this is an opportunity to look for a buy low on the Panthers for the season. I don't think the Texans warrant 3-point favorite on the road at this point in their progression as a young team. Going back to sort of the kind of underpinnings of a lot of last week's handicaps, the preseason look ahead on this one was Panthers -3, and now it's Panthers +3. So you've got a 6-point adjustment on the data we've got through 6 weeks, where you had a different play caller that notably struggles early in the season with offensive play calling. Switching over, I think, to Thomas Brown is potentially a positive decision for the Panthers and their offensive efficiency, their offensive potential. And I think the fact that you have just in general a staff under Frank Reich in Carolina, who I have a lot of regard for. I think there are some really good assistants, some really, just in general good coaches on that staff, and they get now 2 weeks to prepare for a game against a team that they're probably should be power rated similarly to. You're at home, you're starting to get a number of players back after kind of unfortunate injuries in the first portion of the season. This sets up basically every single signal here. You're getting line value on the Panthers. They're making an interesting change, so there's going to be some tendency breakers. There's more health. Health is a positive here for the Panthers. Like basically everything's here points Panthers ought to be the play, and I'm going to take them on the money line as opposed to taking the +3. But there's been some interesting two-way action on the market here. Saw the 3 early this week, thought, wow, that's not going to last. Everybody's going to be onto this, and this is going to go to 2.5. It went to 2.5 and then back to 3. So there's clearly someone out there thinking that the Texans are clearly better based on the data you got through 6 games. And I don't know that I'm seeing that yet. This is still you could say positive stuff about the Texans if you want as well. Like their offensive line is getting healthier, sure. Their wide receivers are playing well, sure. But I think the kind of the underlying conclusion that the Texans are effectively a touchdown better than the Panthers is really, really tough for me to get to.
Okay, maybe one of those people that's trying to move the market. Texans and Panthers should not be power rated. Similarly, you are so unserious, Drew. We've seen this before with YouTube commenters. It hasn't worked out.
That's what I was going to say.
Well, Judah, take it away. Are you one of those people that are potentially seeing the Texans as a far better team than the Panthers?
I am. I think actually Drew raises a bunch of fair concerns, and it's kind of the same ones I held. And now, especially that we're getting our commenters, this feels like a repetition of the past, and maybe I should kind of fade my angle here. But I will say I think this matchup sets up perfectly for the Texans. CJ Stroud has some of the most drastic splits of how he performs under pressure versus not, from a clean pocket versus not. The Panthers don't really have much of a pass rush at all, nor do they really have anyone to cover Tank Dell and Nico Collins. I think it's kind of crazy, and I'm not really sure if it's like a CJ Stroud elevating those guys or like they kind of emerged. But if you told me before the season that the Texans would have two of the top performing receivers in the NFL, I would have said you're crazy, which is what gives me a little bit of like, okay, this is new information we've learned from, the preseason to now. And I think there is certainly, by my metrics, there is every bit reason to think that it is sustainable for Tank Dell and Nico Collins to kind of perform at a terrific clip. I would also say that if you want to beat the Texans on the defensive side of the ball, which they're certainly easy to expose, I think you need to have good pass protection, because the Texans can generate a quick pass rush, and you're also going to need some secondary weapons. Steven Nelson is having an awesome year at cornerback for them. You're going to need some secondary weapons to kind of expose them. And the Panthers just simply don't have that. I mean, Adam Thielen has kind of turned the clock back 5 years, and it's been awesome this year. I think Steven Nelson and even Jimmy Ward, who's been fine in the slot, can kind of take care of him. And you're kind of relying on, Jonathan Mingo and DJ Chark, who really haven't done anything to kind of beat the Texans in their weakest areas. I'm more than happy to take these points. I think the Texans, they're being power rated on offense around like the 17th. I think the market's finally catching up there, but I think there's maybe a little bit more to go, especially in kind of matchups in which they can play with clean pockets, which they should have. That I'm more than comfortable to take the points, even despite Drew's very, very fair concerns, which are maybe making me a little bit less confident.
Well, that's progress, I think, Drew. Sam, I'd ask you one simple question. Have you learned nothing from last week in fading Drew's picks, particularly when he comes at it from these different angles?
Do you know what? When I was kind of previewing this, going through all my numbers, putting my picks into our spreadsheet, I just looked at a line and I thought, what sort of absolute madman is going around betting on the Panthers here? And then when I saw it was Drew, I thought, oh no, I've made the same mistake as last week again. So look, I'm taking the alt line here. I'm giving up 5 points. I just look at this team. I think the Texans are just so much better. I think CJ Stroud versus Bryce Young, this is the kind of big conversation that everyone's having. And I think there is a lot more to this matchup than that. I will say one thing about Stroud is, was it 1 interception so far this season? And the team as a whole have 3 turnovers, which is 2 less than their nearest competition, which I think says a huge amount about how well they're protecting the football. But generally, there's 2 things here that kind of make me really side with the Texans. First of all, it's their offensive line. They obviously struggled with fitness at the start of the season, but they now have their kind of top guys back. And just in terms of experience, that's an offensive line with a lot of experience on it. Whereas you look across at the Panthers O-line, I think there's 1 full year between the 2 guys on their left side. So that kind of inexperience and naivety, I think, is potentially an issue here. And I just do not trust the Carolina D to be able to really put a huge amount of pressure onto the Texans. They've allowed 31 points per game, which is tied with the Broncos. And let's not forget, the Broncos gave up 70 points in a single game here. This is not a good defense against an offense that can keep the ball and are fairly safe with it. And they will be welcoming, you mentioned Tank Dell, Judah. He is back, I believe, coming out of concussion protocol. So they're getting the kind of speed and playmaking threat that he offers back. And I just think I think this is going to be an easy win for the Texans. And to be honest, I'm I'm now looking past that game. I'm now looking forward to if it happens that the Panthers end up with the first overall pick again. What do they do? Do they trade that pick for a bounty? Do we have to put up with 1,000?
Oh, they don't have
that.
They don't have their pick. It belongs to Chicago.
God, of course, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Of course. Ignore me then.
Drew, final word, I guess. It's finding that balance between, so you mentioned the look ahead lines. So Panthers were 3-point favorites at the start of the season. We're now Panthers. It's finding that balance. Sometimes you can overdo that as well, but also important. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. And you want me to boil this down to something more simple. I'm touchdown. I'm saying touchdown. Obviously, home field advantage is not worth 3 points. Nobody's stupid, but this any number between 3 and 6 is saying that there is a marked difference in these teams. And I think the preseason, we thought that they were about the same. In fact, we thought the Panthers were better. And I think that in general with, this, coming off a bye, potential for some of these key players to come back healthy. I have not gotten word that Frankie Luvu is going to play or Von Bell is going to play. I'm hopeful that one or both of those guys go, because if they don't, then all the points are valid. Like, the Texans are going to run all over this team and the Panthers are going to have to go score for score. And they've shown you nothing to this point in the season that they can do that. But the point is that it's week 8. We know a lot about these teams. The adjustments that the market has made broadly are fair. So there are very few examples where you can say there has been a huge adjustment in the positive direction for the Texans and in the negative direction for the Panthers. That's based on a relatively small sample, and particularly a small sample where the Panthers doinked a lot of games where, Frank Reich was calling minus EV offense. Thomas Brown takes over. It's a bit of an unknown. I'm perfectly willing to take the line value that exists in the vacuum, combine that with some of the uncertainty that is players coming back and new offensive scheme being introduced here. Ultimately, this may be a blowout in favor of the Texans, at which point, congratulations to everybody that bets Houston. I think it's funny that we as a group have worked our way into a Polish middle with the most likely outcome of this game, with Houston winning by 3. But it is what it is. I think, there's not a lot on the week 8 card that you should be that excited about. And so here I am kind of literally just trying to pick on the same angle that we had last week, which is if you are weighting your priors anywhere between 25 and 40% compared to what the data you've got for this season, it is telling you to bet the Panthers.
Okay, Panthers money line 2.4, Sam and Judah on Texans minus alternative handicaps minus 5.0 for Sam, minus 5.5 for Judah. And do check out those alternative handicaps closer to kickoff in the Matchbook Betting Exchange. Invariably, we will be best price on the Odds Checker UK price grid. We'll go to massive game here, Bengals at the 49ers. We'll start with you, Sam, and take a quick look at the betting first that we have on the Matchbook Betting Exchange. Bengals 3.1 underdogs here. The Niners 1.43. The point spread sees the Bengals get a 5.5 head start at 196, and the total is 45.0. So I guess my question to you, Sam, how did we get here on the Niners? Like 2 weeks ago, clear favorites for Super Bowl around 5.0, I think it was, and the Bengals had a tough start to the season. Joe Burrow has a massive opportunity to do something very, very funny, I guess, this weekend.
Yeah, and so my best bet here is the 49ers money line, and I want to go for 49ers minus 5.5, but I can't quite do it, and I'll kind of go through the reasons for that. Is obviously we've seen the two losses for the Niners in succession, but I'm not really too worried about that. Certainly more worried about the Vikings one than I would be the Browns one because of the standard of their defense. But kind of what's kind of done this for me is there's two things that leap out and make me want to back the Niners. Firstly, the Bengals, they are just shipping points on the road. 71 points they've given up in 3 games, and those 71 points being to the Browns, the Titans, and the Cardinals. So you're not exactly talking kind of 3 of the league's best offensive sides there. Then the 49ers have been an absolute juggernaut at home, 107 points in those 3 games, 30 points on the Giants, 35 on the Cardinals, and obviously 42 on the Cowboys. But on the flip side of that, the 2 things that are seriously concerning me are we don't know really how Joe Burrow is going to be. He certainly looked, last time we did see the Bengals, he certainly did look considerably healthier, which I think is a real kind of positive for the Bengals. Obviously, potentially a positive for bettors, but I kind of want to see him against a better defense here and see how he does under kind of heavy pressure. So that worries me from a betting perspective. And the other thing that kind of worries me, and I don't know how the NFL is kind of allowing stuff like this, is the Niners coming off a Monday Night Football playing a team who've had a bye. I just think that it's a step too far. I think the Monday Night Football team should be kind of exempt from playing a team on a bye the next Sunday. But that kind of difference in rest for the two teams, in addition to kind of my question marks over Joe Burrow's health, are making me shy away from taking the 5.5 and just going for a simple 49ers money line.
Okay, caution urge from Sam there. And I guess, look, we've seen it in football in the Premier League this season. Liverpool getting a lot of 12:30 games. You would think with all the analytics in the world that they would have fairer matchups, but I guess that's the way they have it at the moment. Judah, if you were to lean on a side here, which way would you be going?
Yeah, if I had to lean, I'd go Bengals. I think in the kind of weirder version, I'm using a lot of Drew's logic of like, how much have we learned about the teams? I don't know what the preseason look ahead spread was, but I imagine it was 2.5 if I had to guess.
It was 1.
1, okay. Inside of 3, whatever it is. And there are kind of a couple of points that would lead me here. I think we actually have a pretty decent sample because I think Kyle Shanahan is the driver of this Niners offense. And like undoubtedly with all of their weapons healthy, they've been absolutely amazing. And that's kind of like up until a couple of weeks ago, that's all we saw with Brock Purdy. And that was kind of the like sample. But this is not the first time. Kyle Shanahan is a whiz. This is not the first time that he hasn't had kind of his full slate of weapons. And like they had a bunch of bad years with CJ Beathard and Nick Mullins. It wasn't like it was just automatic Kyle Shanahan. You plug in Kyle Shanahan and like the Niners offense is going to be amazing. We have a sample of that not really happening. I'd be pretty concerned about the Niners lacking their weapons. Deebo Samuel is going to be out. I imagine that Trent Williams will be as well. And I think the Trent Williams one really matters. Brock Purdy has been in his rate of clean pockets is the 5th lowest in the NFL. The strength of the Bengals is their pass rush, especially at edge. And I'm not sure that the Niners kind of are able to, if you're running Juwan Jennings and kind of like there's a huge drop off, especially after the catch between Deebo Samuel and Juwan Jennings. They're being given a lot of credit for, 5.5 favorites over the Bengals. That's a huge upgrade. And I'm not sure that we really know exactly what Brock Purdy and this Kyle Shanahan, this iteration of the offense without all of their weapons really looks like. And there's certainly some concerns there. On the flip side with the Bengals, yes, I don't want to guess about Burrow's health. The thing that was really kind of concerning me early in the season was that they were running a totally different style offense where Joe Burrow was not scrambling at all and was one of the worst on the rare occasions when he did. And he was also getting rid of the ball in 2.2 seconds, which means that his wide receivers didn't have enough time to get open, let plays develop, and it was just tanking their entire offense. They shifted that. In their previous 2 games, and I think it will continue to shift as Joe Burrow's health improves. And it kind of went back to the old Bengals offense of throwing in like 2.6, 2.7, which especially when you think about who their receivers are, which are guys that win down the field, that matters more than just a random offense that goes from 2.3 seconds to 2.7 seconds. That kind of allows me to think there's some signal in the Bengals coming back. And all of that kind of just ties into what do we really know about these teams? The answer is, are we so confident that the Bengals are markedly worse than they were in the preseason? I'm not sure. I think there's some reasons to kind of buy the Bengals. Are we so sure that the Niners are way better? Absolutely not, especially when they're not healthy.
Okay, Drew, are we sure the Niners are far better than they were in those preseason priors? You mentioned the look-ahead line at around 1, currently sits at -5.5.
Yeah, and this is flying in the face of my general thesis there.
Yeah.
But I think this is the Niners, and I think it has to do more with the matchup of the Niners offense against the Bengals defense. I'm expecting the Niners are going to bring back the reinforcements here. If there's no Trent Williams, if there's no Deebo Samuel, then the handicap is obviously much sketchier. But in general, I like the there has been a pretty clear way to attack this Bengals defense in game scripts, particularly. Lou Anarumo is still doing his thing where he adjusts magnificently at halftime. But, if I think in general, a neutral game state, the Niners are going to be able to score points on this Cincinnati team and really put pressure on the offense to answer. In general, I'm again hoping that Dre Greenlaw goes. I'm hoping that Fred Warner is just fine. Those guys are going to need a little bit of treatment this week, I'm guessing, after the injuries they suffered on Monday night. But they do match up pretty well to turn the Bengals into a one-dimensional team. The Bengals offense is weirdly rostered. The offensive line is kind of more built for run blocking, yet they can't get a ton going in that department. And Joe Mixon seems like he is well over the hill. And they're not especially well rostered for pass blocking, and they desperately need pass blocking right now as Joe Burrow is recovering from the calf injury. So I'm fine kind of expecting a bounce back here from the Niners D-line, being able to generate pressure and obvious passing downs. And I see kind of an entire half of the distribution here of game states where the Niners are playing with the lead, and then this turns into Joe Burrow running for his life. And considering what he's got on film so far this season, I don't mind having laying the points under a touchdown here on the Niners in a spot that suggests that they need to find some answers. Third loss here for the Niners would be pretty impactful in their hopes of getting a 1 seed in the NFC. And while obviously the Bengals are coming off a bye and probably have their healthiest game that we've seen them this season, I still need to see kind of a complete game where Joe Burrow's mechanics look like they looked the last couple of years before I believe that he is anywhere close to the guy that we kind of had priced with our preseason priors that are suggesting that the Bengals should be within a field goal of the Niners. So that's maybe the reason I'm willing to go to the well here with the Niners, and it's a pretty soft angle because I make this 6.5, and I am still penalizing the Bengals a bit for particularly the mechanics we've seen from Joe Burrow. Like, it looks like he's finding ways to play around the calf injury as opposed to being fully healthy. And I think that until I see it in person, then I'm going to have a tough time believing that the Bengals are back. Weak angle for me, but I laid it with the Niners.
Okay, and before we move on from this game, Judah, as a Deebo Samuel fantasy owner myself, you're saying he's going to be out this week as well?
That is, I heard reports were last week that Kyle Shanahan said explicitly he will miss this week and next week. I think Trevor Williams will be questionable. I have no idea.
Cool. Factor that into your betting there. And Niners -5.5 for Drew. Sam leans that way, but it's going Niners money line. And Judah's leaning towards the Bengals. No official bet. Insights on matchbook.com. Full recap of all the guys' picks. We'll go to any other bets section. We'll start with you, Judah. And for what it's worth, I really do think this is overpriced just based on the last few weeks. In particular, the Vikings money line. I thought they were very impressive. Maybe not on the head coach all the time, but the way they played, they should have won that game further, I think.
Yeah. I think that the Vikings, by my numbers, have been a top 5 offense the entire season, which I've kind of wanted to ignore because it didn't feel exactly right. But I think ultimately when you take a big picture view, the things we know about Kirk Cousins based on his traits, his lack of scrambling, his play in structure, is that if you give him protection and if you give him open receivers, he's going to produce at an elite clip. Right. The difference this year, I think, with the Vikings as opposed to previous years is with how good their tackle duo has been. That sample of plays, which I'm talking about, of in structure is 90% as opposed to previous seasons where that's 80%. And that's a huge, huge gap because he can't do anything outside of structure. I don't think that certainly if the Niners didn't do it, I don't think that the Packers defensive line is going to be capable of kind of taking that 90% sample that we've had so far of the Vikings and moving it closer to 80. And I think that's kind of the main angle here. The Packers offense, after being schemed terrifically in the first couple of weeks, talking about forcing coverage mistakes, things like early down runs, early down passes over early down runs. Now it's just they're finding themselves in 3rd and 7 constantly. Jordan Love is not a guy you want needing to convert on 3rd and obvious passing situations. The Vikings have been bringing blitzes at a almost historic clip. They're at 60% this year. That's an area where Jordan Love has struggled. But all of this is to say, I think the Vikings are materially underpriced on offense. The market's kind of projecting them as a 13th best unit right now. I think is actually closer to top 5, even with Justin Jefferson out. I don't think the Packers can do anything. There's nothing about the Packers matchup in specific that will, I think, slow down the Vikings offense. And I want to take a 5 offense versus a 20 offense when there's effectively no real line here.
Yeah, 189, the money line for the Vikings. Sam, you landed an over 30 something in the Raiders Bears, wasn't it, last week? And we're going for over 36.0 again. You might have found a little niche here. Just back the really low totals and back the over.
Yeah, this is the lowest total of the week, and it's less so much of, well, actually the fact it is low is obviously kind of a key part of this, but it's more the fact it's kind of dropped from 37.5 down to 36. I just think they're so often in these games where obviously we know Ridder isn't particularly great. I think on the road he's had 1 touchdown pass in his career, 7 turnovers, and obviously there's a lot of doubts around Ryan Tannehill playing, which means we're going to see Malik Willis or Will Levis, which again I can see why people are very nervous about that. But I think there is money to be made when it looks like you have a true stinker of a matchup. And here we have 2 reasonable defenses. We're going to see 2 quarterbacks that aren't exceptional. But I think these games are the ones that often do surprise us. And basically, this is more just a reaction from where the money's going. I want to go the other way and try and get some value there.
Yeah, 36.0 currently, and at the over, that is 192. And Drew, you have a couple of plays you want to get on board on this Ravens train and make it pay.
Yeah, I think this is pretty clear, disparity in terms of class. I make the Ravens outside of a 10 here, and that again is, cautious optimism here that the ability for the Ravens to win in the trenches is something that they can carry over week to week. I also look at their schedule and the fact that they've already, had probably one of the more difficult stretches of travel of any team so far this season, and they have come through it with, smelling like a rose, and only had to play about half of a game last week is interest. Normally I would be running away from a game where you have a road favorite of this magnitude after as much travel as they have had so far this season. And that's just, I can't find a single advantage here for the Cardinals with considering how they're rostered right now and, where they stand in terms of, the current season's progression to say that they're going to be competitive in this game. I think, the Ravens to me look like team that is going to absolutely throttle teams that don't have an ability to at least create some sort of exotic pressure and or find some ways to do clear winning pass blocking. So Ravens with the points for me in the desert. And then I like the New Orleans Saints to beat the Indianapolis Colts. I think the signal we've gotten from Gardner Minshew in the handful of starts he's made is that he is not sort of the safe, low variance number 1 backup quarterback that he was made out to be. I think he is quite poor. His degree to which he is inclined to make turnover-worthy plays is startling, and he's up against a Saints defense that is very well coordinated, very well coached, and I think particularly matches up well against the running attack for the Colts here. So Colts in a negative game state, to me, tilts Saints pretty aggressively, and the Saints have kind of shown. I don't know that I can really make any hay on this necessarily, but I think the signal from the Jaguars game was pretty clear, which is when the Saints are aggressive, that offense is amazing. Like, they have receivers that can create separation, and Carr can deliver strikes down the field. Like, I don't know why that's not more of their identity, why they don't want to tack into that as their offensive identity, but maybe they look at the tape and do some self-evaluation and come to that conclusion themselves with 10 days to prepare for this game. But either way, it seems like the Colts want to play ugly, slow, slog it out football, play from ahead, in which case I think they beat the Colts pretty comfortably, or they tack into a new aggressive type of approach, in which case I think they beat the Colts comfortably. Or so Saints money line for me, I think they should be favored by under a field goal.
Saints money line at the Colts 2.08 and the Ravens minus 9.0 on the road at the Cardinals 2.04. Loving to get onto this section. The best week 8 long shots. We introduced this around circa week 3, week 4. Best long shots record down your screen. Drew, you're actually up nearly £200 if you're betting to a level stake of £20, including that 2% commission on the Matchbook Betting Exchange. So well worth checking out the Matchbook Betting Exchange to get the best of the numbers, but also listen to the guys on the long shots picks. So yeah, Drew, I'll start with you because this is going to be an interesting treble best long shots here. We'll get to that in a sec. The Broncos make the case I brought Russell Wilson in as a backup quarterback in fantasy, so I'm believing slowly, I think.
I'm actually kind of sad that we banned difficult from the chat because I have a sneaking suspicion who that is, and I think it's a Patrick Mahomes fanboy. And to that degree, I'm going against Patrick Mahomes and the Broncos this week. Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs this week, taking the Broncos, and it's a pretty straightforward deal. This number's too big. The fact that these teams prepared for each other 2 weeks ago, and the familiarity, and the Broncos defense getting healthier, all factors that to me say the Broncos are going to make this a pretty competitive match. The fact that the Chiefs lose Nick Bolton and that their run defense was starting to show some pretty significant cracks, I think matters. The fact that the Chiefs running game has been stuck in mud now for several weeks, combined with the fact that the Broncos are getting better in stopping the run, and they pretty clearly, I think, are still being rated based on some of the results without Justin Simmons, I think is wrong. And the Broncos, to me, I definitely like 8 points better than I like the money line by a long shot. But there is definitely a world where the ball bounces their way here and they get the win. I think that game on Thursday Night Football a couple weeks ago was a lot closer than people remember. And just in general, I think the Broncos are a bet on because their defense is getting healthy.
Okay. Judah, we'll get to an opposite opinion on that shortly. Judah, game we covered, so not too long on this, but Bengals money line is appealing to you, 3.1.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the angles we just outlined earlier, which is one, that this Niners offense is being given too much credit for their current roster with all of their injuries. And I'm willing to accept that the Bengals are going to look a lot more like the 2022 and 2021 units. And a little bit, to add to that is obviously the Niners have a terrific pass rush. They're a little beatable in the secondary. That's kind of always been true, especially if you give them time. If Burrow is healthy or healthier and can kind of increase that scramble rate from like 5% to like more like 11 or 12 where he's been in the past, I think that can turn, 1 or 2 plays that would have been sacks into positive gains. He in 2021 and 2022 was like the best passer when scrambling. I think if we can kind of get more of that, that will only further boost this case. But ultimately, it comes down to kind of like, how much have we learned about these teams? If the Bengals are a lot like the unit we thought they were going to be, this line is fundamentally mispriced.
Okay, Bengals money line 3.1 at the Niners. Sam, over to you for your best long shot. It's Browns money line at the Seahawks 2.6, and then lead into why Drew's completely incorrect to fade the Chiefs.
All right, let's start with the Browns money line against the Seahawks. I think Judah mentioned earlier that last year they kind of took us by surprise. We didn't expect a huge amount from them, and I think that's kind of really continued into this year. Just they're a good side. They have good coaching. They have good, not great quarterback play. They're just a solid all-round team. However, I do think their record is slightly flattering. I wouldn't want to go as far as to say fraudulent, but they've beaten the Cards, not a good side, the Giants, who weren't a particularly good side at the time, the Panthers, who are not a good side, and the Lions, who, as we saw last week, are kind of a bit of a confusing team potentially. So I'm maybe not particularly as high on the Seahawks as their record would suggest. And with the Browns, there's obviously the doubt around Deshaun Watson. I'm not sure. I mean, I do think, as much as people have been dunking on him where possible, I do think there still is a drop off to PJ Walker, but PJ Walker's fine. He's capable. They've beaten the Colts and the 49ers with him under center, so I think they can get another win quite easily with him there. And ultimately, this is about their defense more than it's about who's playing QB. They're giving up an average of 243 scrimmage yards per game. That's less than 30 yards, less than everybody else, which is absolutely insane. So for me, this is a team who are great against the run, very good against the pass, and who have a guy in Myles Garrett who, if there was any justice in this cruel world, would be firmly in the MVP race. But I just think they're a better team. So that's the reasoning for the Browns. We'll move on to my best bet, which is the Chiefs minus 7.5. I don't want to take on Drew here, so I'm already kind of regretting this. But ultimately, it was 17 days ago they played last. I think it was an 11-point win. And I just think I think the Chiefs will do a better job in learning from that last game the Broncos will do a better job in learning from that last game. And I think Drew's absolutely right in some aspects of what he said about the way this team have been rated. And I do think that they're not quite as bad as potentially you might have thought earlier in the season, or some are still thinking. But I just think the Chiefs are far too good. They've covered the spread in 5 of their 7 this year. The Broncos have done it just once, and I'm just more than happy just to take the Chiefs here. I think there comes a time where you've got to back the best QB, and Mahomes is 12-0 against the Broncos. So it's a very obvious bet, but I'm just going to go along with it.
Okay, Drew, we spent time on this. We won't spend too long, but Panthers money line is your best bet.
Yeah, just so Sam knows, this is not 2 times. This is not a personal thing. I did not look at your best bet. I apologize, and I'm literally just trying to find something a little bit a little bit of outrageous value. But we'll go back to a handicap we already covered, which is the Panthers money line versus the Texans. That's 2.4. I think this should be closer to a pick. If you want to a little bit of the protection of the 3 instead of taking the money line, I'm not going to fault anyone for that. I think this is ultimately a game that probably gets decided in the final stages, and the fact that you have a bit of an unknown with respect to how Carolina is going to call this offense, I think is advantage Carolina. So give me the Panthers. Okay,
final word to you, Judah, on best bets.
Yeah. Going to go with the Jaguars 5.5. One we talked about, just to address a comment we got earlier about Deontay Johnson coming back. I don't think that matters as much. We've talked about this multiple times on this podcast. The Steelers scheme forces the fewest coverage mistakes. It's been this way for a couple of years running. Kenny Pickett last year, Mr. Trubisky last year, threw into tight coverage at by far the highest rate in the NFL, of which your success is like way worse than throws on to non-tight windows. The Jaguars have kind of grinded out a 5-2 start, and I don't think they've actually reached their ceiling. We've talked about this also a bunch of Trevor Lawrence his fundamentals have been awesome. Drops are kind of killing them. Ultimately, this comes down to 2 teams who I think are power rated wrong, and I think the matchup really sets up well for the Jaguars, considering how much man coverage the Steelers play, how good Trevor Lawrence has been against man coverage, and the fact that the strength of the Steelers defense is their pass rush, in which Trevor Lawrence gets rid of the ball in the second quickest time to throw in the NFL, which should mitigate the effects of the Steelers pass rush.
Okay, we have our best week 8 bet. Jags -5.5, Chiefs -7.5, and the Panthers on the money line. And the best long shots to be treble, Broncos, Browns, and Bengals over 30.0 currently is the treble there, or Trixie, if you want to have a few bob on that on the Matchbook Betting Exchange. My thanks to Drew, Judah, Sam. We'll be back same time, same place next week. Check out insights on matchbook.com for a full recap on all bets. Until then, enjoy this week's football. Take care.